on today's podcast.
Because when you come from meager beginnings, you're looking for any type of success, anything that tells you that you're okay. Because all of us want to just be okay.
The truth is, adding value will never go out of style.
This podcast is brought to you by iWatch Security. iWatch Security. Get the savings and service that you deserve.
Hello, and thanks for joining us for another Five Things podcast. Here for part two with Jim Allen. I know you wouldn't say self-made millionaire, real estate, doing billions, but, it's a team effort, of course, but it all started with you as well. So welcome back. And we got into some good stuff the other day. I highly recommend, if you're hearing this, part one is great. We got into a lot of things that people would say, well, how is that stuff? How is that information going to help me in 2024? And in my opinion, if you're going to start a journey, you got to know where you're at. If you want to go to Illinois, you need to know you're in North Carolina. So I want to talk about a few things specifically today. And we were just talking about some of the Olympic stuff here a second ago, new information coming about a handful of things. And we're going to really try to stay a little bit more on point today with our goal is to help people prepare to win in 24 and beyond. And we've both been in business a long time. We both have a heart to help people, and we're both willing enough to take whatever arrows come with an opinion, because that's what we're sharing here is opinions. And I'm doing all the talking here. Thanks for joining us again, Jim.
That's okay, because I'm sitting here reflecting, thinking, my sole purpose in this back end of my career, just like yours is really helping other people. Because, as you say, when you've had a certain amount of success in your life, you're working after that for the people around you. I mean, truly, I'm doing a lot of what I do now because I care about the people behind me. I just sent in an application this morning to run for the Raleigh board again because I feel like I have a commitment where you gain things out of a profession. If you aren't giving something back to that profession, then you're stealing from it. And I feel the phase that I've gotten into in my career, it's time for me to help other people achieve. And not people that just work for me, people in general, because, when you're in business, you want to leave the business you're in better than it was when you got there. And if I do have to exit at some point in my career, I want to make sure that the next generation of agents, the next generation of entrepreneurs is better prepared than I was, because my career is a fail-forward career, like a lot of people's, where you don't necessarily have someone giving you guidance or direction. So instead, I have failed forward so often just because I was willing to try. And I think a lot of people defeat themselves before they get started because they decide, I'm going to lose, so I'm not even going to make the effort. I've always got up and put the effort in. If it didn't work, it didn't work, and I figured another way to do it the next day.
And I think that's an important part, because you're willing to put yourself out there and fail. The good thing about being in 2024 is you've got a lot of Jim Allens that have come before you. If you're listening to this, you don't have to make all the mistakes that we may have made. So when you open yourself up to the information, even if you disagree, just consider it. Because if I hear Jim Allen say something that runs contrary to what I think, if Jim's saying now's 2024 is an opportunity to get aggressive and take market share because people are nervous and scared and they're clammed up, I need to consider that, even if that's not my natural instinct, because you've been there and done that. And there's four things I wrote down here, really starting with two things. So figuring out where you're at. Before you're going to go anywhere, let's figure out where you're at. And there's the macro, the high level point of view. where you're at, and then there's the micro. And I would say the macro would be, what is the economic environment I'm in? How is inflation impacting me? There are, the politics, an election year, interest rates, the real estate market, your industry. There's all these macro things that I think you need to take inventory of so you can figure out where you're at. And then there's the micro, and we'll come back to the micro. But
on the macro aspect, though, what I would tell you is I think a lot of people get so focused on what they hear the situation is, and then that determines their direction or their path. And what I would tell you most successful people do is listen to what the world is telling you is getting ready to happen to you and prepare exactly the opposite for it, because normally that's when it's time to strike. When others are telling you that we're going to have a fallback, we're going to have this, we're going to have that, even though we're not in the middle of doing that, some people start panicking. Some people start putting the brakes on a little bit, and you get opportunities out of that if you're an aggressive entrepreneur moving forward, because there is no bad time to move forward. I don't care what is going on in other people's macro. If you have a plan when you're attacking something, there is no bad time to insert it. Interest rates being high, they aren't high. You have to really, when you hear that right now, if they've been artificially low for a long period of time, that does not mean when they return to normal that they're high. That just means they've returned to normal. Mm-hmm. The only problem is a lot of the agents in our market, a lot of the lenders in our market, and a lot of the buyers have never really been in a normal market. And that's all we're doing is returning to a more normal market. And I say more normal. Truth is, it's the third best market that's ever existed on the planet. But when you've just come out of the best one that's ever happened, mm-hmm. anything that's not the best feels like a downturn. And people, I don't know where this comes from, but people today seem so ready to fail that even when they're on top of a mountain, they're trying to fall off. And I don't understand that, because when you get to the top of something, you got there. Even if you fell a little bit, you know how to get back there because you've taken that journey already. And I feel like there are so many people, and I wish I could understand the mentality of it. I've heard schools, I've heard all kinds of people blamed for it. What I really believe there is there's not that person behind them anymore, being their parent or someone else who's really cares, that says, you know what, I believe in you no matter what happens, because it only takes one person believing in someone for them to be able to achieve anything. Sometimes it's us who has to believe in ourselves, but it's always nice to hear it from another place. For me growing up, I had great parents. My dad died very young, but my mom always told me, you can do anything you want to do, whether you had the ability or not. She never said, hey, you know what, you're poor, so you have to stay poor for your whole life. She said, when you get up, you put your pants on like other people do. There's nothing to prohibit you other than your own energy and how you want to perceive things. Mm-hmm. So when we're dealing in the macro, it is something you need to listen to, obviously. But when you hear it, you have to hear that. That's someone else's reality. That's the media. And unfortunately, we're in times when we have a media that frames it the way they want it to be, whether mm-hmm. it's true or it isn't, unfortunately. And so what we have to do is deflect from that, find our own sources that give us where is the world right this moment. And I think when we look at the macro, we can't get stuck in it. We have to look at where are we really at, because mm-hmm. we're never going to be out here. We're always going to be below that and reacting to whatever's going on in the global market. We have to run our small businesses as small businesses. We can't worry about, okay, the Treasury's printing money like there's no tomorrow. We have to say, you know what? If the dollar gets devalued, I just have to make more money, regardless of where it is. So instead of pausing and stopping, oh gosh, the dollar's getting diluted, I'm just going to quit, which is what most people do. Then that means if it goes in half, I've got to sell twice as much to stay where I'm at.
Do you think that a lot of people even realize they're kind of quitting?
They don't. And they quit every day. And they quit before they start a lot of times. You know, people begin the process and the first bump in the road, they quit because, oh, it didn't work like I thought it was going to work. Okay, well, all that says is, you know what? My plan may not have been bad. Maybe I didn't put it out there well. Maybe I need to go back. Maybe I missed a step on the way this time. Don't assume your plan's wrong and just scrap it. I didn't put enough effort in. Maybe I didn't smile when I was talking to the other person. It can be minor things that we tweak to improve our performance. Or maybe I needed to know a little more about this. And you've got a phone in your hand today that can give you the answer to just about anything in the world. Start looking for answers before you give up.
How important do you think it is to be what I would say is flexible? So understanding that, for example, if I want to get in shape and I want to improve my health and I start running a lot, but then I hurt my knee, it doesn't mean that I can't do other things to get in shape and stay healthy and this and that. It's I have to change my plan. How important do you think it is to have that type of mindset?
Flexibility is the greatest key to success in any business. And I don't know that there's an entrepreneur on the earth that flexibility isn't why they are where they are. Because, you know, as I start a lot of things and I have goals to go do certain things, something else will spring up that's really where the money is or where the success in that item is. But I've been trailing this path over here, wanting to be right so bad. And a lot of people have this disease that they have to be right all the time, will make them stay on this path despite the fact they see, here's where this should have really led me. They're not flexible enough to make that turn. Instead, they've decided, you know what? I'm smart. I know what I'm doing. I'm going to go down this path no matter whether this is pulling me this way or not. I believe, unfortunately, that's where people get lost in transactions.
What do you think causes that? Ego?
Ego. 100%.
Rather than saying, rather than realizing we've been driving down the wrong road, it's time to make some turns. They just keep trying to drive.
Just don't want to admit you're wrong. You know, so many folks have trouble admitting they're wrong, just like people have problem apologizing. You know, I know I'm going to offend people sometimes before I get started, and I apologize sometimes
in
before
advance.
we begin and say, you know what, if I hurt your feelings during this, please don't take it personally, because nothing about this is ever personal with me. I am so laser focused on things sometimes when I'm doing them. You may think that I don't care about what your opinions are. It's not that. I'm hearing it, but I am trying to make sure the train stays on the tracks too. I'm hearing that you think we should turn over here, and I'm preparing for that turn. But if I make the turn too quickly sometimes, I may throw everything off momentum-wise. I agree with you. It's time to do this. But I'm not going to pause to explain to you why I believe in what you're saying well enough. Because if you're going to lead, you have to lead. And, you know, leading means not being afraid. You know, everybody thinks you lead so that you get the trophies. You lead so that you get the glory of things. No, you lead to avoid the crashes. You lead to bring the other people up alongside you, because you and I have talked about this, like with Julie, who works with you, about someone I saw a lot in, and you do as well. If you don't bring those people up, make them feel fulfilled in whatever it is they're doing, why would you want to win alone? I mean, I want the people around me to know that they were a part of that. But there are times, like yesterday in my office, a lot of people were talking about this NAR settlement thing again, and they were going down a rabbit hole that they didn't need to go down. And I had to firmly put my foot down. There are a couple of big companies that announced that they don't plan on paying out anything to buyers' agents for a while, or letting that person negotiate with their seller directly for it, which puts them in conflict with the person they're representing as well. If I'm representing a buyer and I'm also going to go try to get my commission from the other side of this transaction, there's some conflict that happens between that agent and their client. And some of the bigger companies have all of a sudden announced this. I won't say their name, but it's an initial company. And now they're trying to backtrack to say, that's not what we said. No, we're not going to. We're going to let the seller and the buyer figure that out. We have a role in the transaction, comfort, guiding it forward, being a mediator. Listen, when you win, if you represent one side of anything and one side just destroys the other side, there is no way to come back from that so that the two people go forward. I find that my buyers and sellers become friends over time a lot of times. When they get to the closing table, both people are high-fiving. What's wrong with a win-win? But I heard some dissension and some conversations in my group about things, and I said, listen, I want every buyer's agent in this market to feel secure that if they work with our team, we value them enough that we've convinced our seller of their worth. They don't have to argue it out. As a part of convincing that seller he needs to work with me, I'm going to also convince him that that buyer deserves representation. The transaction itself is really who's paying the commissions. It's not buyer or seller. It's both. And it always has been both. It's just our financial model is set up for the seller to pay it. The lending process doesn't allow financing of it. There are certain amounts of money that buyers must hold in reserve that could make it prohibitive to be able to move forward. And unfortunately, when we draw these lines in the sand in every business, that's called being an interrupter. And listen, it's going to be controversial that I say this, but I can't worry about it. I believe the Justice Department in the United States of America has overstepped their bounds this time. They've gotten into business that they're not supposed. There is no protection. No one needed to be protected. There is no monopoly they should be protecting someone against.
There's nothing illegal going on.
Not
it's just
one thing.
A change of the way things are done.
This is the Justice Department overstepping, and that's really sad. And if it happens this time in this, what will be the next area of our lives they overstep? We are set up as a government with three branches, and each of them are supposed to have checks and balances. And right now, all three are out of whack. They are fighting each other so diligently, and maybe there's some collusion going on between two of those branches to the point that they've forgotten who they're serving, the American people, and they've gotten their agendas. Same as in business, if I were trying to push my business in a direction that was harmful to the majority of my clients, and I didn't care as long as I got my point across, that wouldn't last very long, and it wouldn't be successful. And I believe what you're going to see is a lot, and I think it's happening already, that an awful lot of Americans are losing respect for our Justice Department, and they're supposed to be beyond reproach. I know every time I think about the judicial system, I think about those scales. And I think about, how if one side or one opinion gets too far out of whack, how that thing just goes off tilt. And I unfortunately believe that there is a lot of politics going into it currently and driving one side or the other, depending on which party is in play, making it unfair and unbalanced. We did a video this week where everyone on my team who spoke different languages or from different cultures all kind of said hello and said welcome home to the general public, because I want to be a part of a world where I get to embrace people from every culture in the world. I get to know people and their experiences, whatever country they're from, and I get to hear their language. It's rich. It's exciting to know that everybody isn't the same. If everybody in my office or that I do business with had the same accent I do, it wouldn't be very much fun, and you wouldn't know who was answering the telephone. To me, the uniqueness that we have, we should all be embracing right now. Instead, we're all fighting over it. We're trying to say, my uniqueness is best. Yours is not good. I like, it may make me sound liberal saying that. This is not a liberal point of view.
This is a good point of view.
A point of view of, I don't want to be here alone. I want to enjoy everybody. I don't mind a spirited debate. Like if you and I disagree about something, if we can both keep our tempers and sit down and passionately discuss it, that's great. I had to apologize to someone yesterday because I was passionate about a topic we were on, and I had to keep saying, don't think I'm yelling at you, because I'm not. I'm just passionate about what we're talking about.
Right. Yeah, it's I just think great conversations, when you start with love and respect for your fellow human, you can have great conversations and try to, 7 habits highly effective people, seek first to understand, begin with the end in mind, and things like that. So coming back to our winning in 24, we talked about macro versus micro. How important do you think it is that someone spends a majority of their attention and energy on things that they can directly impact?
I think it's the only way you can stay successful in business, because if you are worried about things that you personally cannot control, you won't feel that you're being successful. So I believe it's one step at a time. I can control what time I get up. I can control whether I can't control the success of the phone call I make, but I can control the fact that I made it. I can control the fact that I make the person I'm talking to understand I care about their opinion, even when I disagree with it. I care that they have one. I just want them to see my side of it. So I think being involved in the things you can directly change, you have to do that step by step by step. And then when you run into the fact that, the person may not be prepared yet to do what you want them to do, it doesn't mean they won't be in the future. It means this second, accept a pause, but tell them right away, I'm coming back again. I know that you're putting this decision on pause because folks don't like to make decisions right now. But be aware, it's on my back burner, and I'm going to bring it back to the front at some point in the future. So staying in the things that you can control and moving those things forward, now I can go back and grab this one when I've moved other platforms far enough along. Like, for example, if I'm trying to help one person, they're not ready yet, I can go help someone similar to them, pull them along, And now I've got an example of how to go back to that first person and say, listen, I was just dealing with someone exactly your age. And she was from Ohio as well. And you know what's strange? She went ahead and decided to let me lead her through this thing. And listen, I'd love for y'all to even talk about the success we had as a result of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think a lot of, and again, you're running an organization full of agents. Do you feel that a lot of people are maybe spending too much mental energy on things they can't control?
That's why I got so upset at my office yesterday, because they were discussing this big picture thing that the Justice Department has thrown down that you're not going to change today. You may change it in the next 3 or 4 years, but what you have to do is say, okay, here's the new set of rules. I have to deal with those. How do I play best within this new set of rules? So that's keeping it in things I can control. I can't control the big decision. It's been made. Mm-hmm. But what I can do is make sure, while I'm following the guidelines of that decision, that I also make the people I'm dealing with comfortable with what it is, but don't put too much energy into it. You know, you give things life when you stress about them. Mm-hmm. You give things life when you constantly are discussing them. Sometimes when something bad just happens, give it a moment. Like if someone in your family or in your NEO's circle dies, you can't change that. They've passed away. Talking about it, you may not be prepared yet to talk. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that you won't need to at some point. It just means today you're not ready. It doesn't mean you and I can't still be talking about other things, but when I hit my head against a wall with you, I should realize, you know what? Back off of that. Discuss other things. It's not that they don't want to talk to me. They're not ready. Let people prepare to talk to you about things. I used an extreme example, mm-hmm. but it's everything. You know, like if two people today both think they're working with the same client, and I get both people's full story, and both people truly, innocently don't realize they're working with the same person. You know, they both only see their side because they're all charged up. I would tell you they're probably both going to lose that client because their focus is on who's right instead of someone needs to serve that client, and maybe we do it together. Or maybe you have a better relationship with them than I do. I'll be the backup. I'll make sure once you've helped them that the dots get crossed. You know, I'll make sure that we do everything right on the back end. You be the lead this time. Next time it may be me that needs to be the lead. Mm-hmm. You never know.
Business owners, do you have active deterrence with your smart security? iWatch Security is veteran-owned, headquartered in Raleigh, and providing service and expertise for 14 years without a rate increase.
I'm Andrei Sveshnikov. When I needed an assist with my home security, I contact iWatch Security.
iWatch Security. Switch for the savings, stay for the service. Mention Andre and receive a $500 discount off your active deterrence system. iWatch Security is your local, Raleigh-based smart security company. So we're coming off a little break here, and if you didn't hear it, both Jim and I did. I had to unplug my phone here. So coming back to if you're going to take a journey, whether it's success in 24 and beyond, you got to know where you're at. One of the things I would say, and I'm curious to get your thoughts, is taking inventory on what assets you have to work with. And when I think about if I was coaching up somebody who, and I do want to get your specific input on maybe people are in different places and what things you would see would be improvements that those specific industries or business owner or what have you. But when I think about figuring out where you're at There's the macro and the micro we've talked about, and I do want to get into inflation a little bit because it's one of those things that we can't control necessarily. I mean, outside of voting and talking about it and bringing knowledge to the topic, it's in the macro, but it is a factor, right? And so one of the principles that I feel like you were alluding to is focus on what you can control, and you may not like the NAR settlement. You can disagree with it, but you have to make adjustments and keep moving forward the best you can, because that's all you can do. And if you're not careful, I think subconsciously, if you're not careful, you will use something as the reason why you're failing. And you will use that excuse as why you're not winning. Meanwhile, people in your market are winning. How important is that self-awareness to
couldn't say it better than you just said it, because that is exactly what paralyzes people. They believe that they are failing, and so therefore they fail, but it can't be their fault. So the first thing I give to everybody that comes to work for me on my team, first I give them a daily read Bible. Second, I give them a mirror. That mirror is not so they look at how pretty they look. It's so that they see themselves and realize the back of that mirror you can't see through. So when you put that mirror in your face and you're looking at your reflection, you can see what you believe and you think. You have no idea what the other person you've blocked them out completely. They, on the other hand, are seeing the reflection you're giving them. They are seeing your voice, your tone, your content. They are seeing that, and you may not be. So when you look in the mirror and you're talking to someone on the phone and you've got this grimace on your face, you've conveyed that in your message to the person on the other end. You just don't know it because you were so intent on getting your point across, you didn't know what to do. But when these people are looking for a reason other than that holding yourself accountable, I think most people that you will find that are super successful have realized they have failures. They have realized, though, that they can't find excuses. They have to be the central cause or reason. Now, at the same time, I have a strong faith, so I believe God allows my energies to go forward as long as I'm not trying to injure other people. But I also believe that most people use an excuse. Like if you call someone one time at 7 o'clock at night, and then I talk to you the next day and I say, hey, did you get in touch with that person? I told you they called me yesterday and they needed some help. And I told them you'd be calling. Oh yeah, I tried them last night at 7. They didn't call me back. What if they had a crisis going on in their lives, and they even had the intention of calling you back? They just forgot themselves. Warm them up one more time or multiple times. Listen, when someone gives you a referral or a lead, and the person on the other end is expecting your call, do not stop until that happens. And listen, sometimes reaching out to the person on the other end, I don't want to bother you. I am sorry I'm reaching out. I'm actually now concerned about your health as well. Please let me know, even if you don't want to talk to me or work with me, let me know you're okay so I can take that stress off of myself, because your friend who referred you to me has asked me, have we spoken? And I told him we hadn't, and gosh, that's not like them. And now I've been concerned about your health, not just getting in touch with you. Keep it human and mean it. I mean, really wonder if something did happen critical in their life. Just because mine's going okay doesn't mean theirs is at this moment. Empathy is one of those things that if you develop it over time and caring about that other person, people know it, and they'll see it and they'll feel it. And all of a sudden, when they start describing you to other people and you hear the feedback, you're like, gosh, I wish I was this person they're feeling. Instead of, oh yeah, I really am that person. That's what most of us do, but wow, what a compliment.
Definitely. And it's interesting. I had a conversation yesterday that I'm thinking about as you're discussing that the people that I know that are probably what I would consider some of the best people, right? They're successful, they're empathetic. I know they give and they care about people. And when I talk to those folks, they're usually the first ones to say, I've got so much to work on. And I do believe that, some of the people that I see that would say like they don't feel like they need to read books, they don't feel like they need to grow or this and that, those are the people where I'm like, oof. So
I tell everybody, when I walk into a room and say, look, I'm going to disappoint you before we get started right now because I don't have wings, I can't fly, and I'm not right all the time. And unfortunately, when you're at a certain level of success, people just think you know everything. And I'm going to tell them, listen, I'm the luckiest human being that's ever lived. Just my luck's happened to have extended over the course of a whole lifetime. And I realize it's not luck, but you make your own luck. It whatever they want to call it, I can make myself have bad luck. If I believe, oh, I've got terrible luck, nothing ever goes my way, you're right, it won't. And you've prophesized it for yourself. Instead of also realizing, you know what, everything great that happens isn't just about me, and everything bad that happens isn't just about me. I'm not that important. And that's the thing I would like to convey to a lot of folks is when you start saying, oh, well, that happens because you're Jim Allen. You're already up there. So when you do this, of course it works. I've always been Jim Allen when I was failing and when I was succeeding. And it wasn't an advantage either time. My confidence level is maybe at a different place because I know that despite how many times I've failed, I still keep getting up. And so the next time I fall down, I don't think it's permanent.
Well, I believe 100% what you're talking about, and not to go off in a crazy direction because this could be a podcast in itself, but the quantum field and quantum physics and energy, and we're basically 99.99999% energy. So when you're extracting that belief and you really believe it and your actions coincide with those beliefs, you're literally impacting the universe around you with your energy and your vibration and your field. And
I'll give you a crazy example.
Right.
My oldest son, great baseball player at the time, was playing in a tournament one weekend. Got hit on the inside of his arm on his throwing hand pretty hard. I convinced him, hey, it's not that hurt. Put some dirt on it. Get back out there. Goes 3 for 4 in that game. Gets 3 hits in the next game. Fortunately, every time they hit it to center field, he fielded it and didn't really need to make a strong throw until the second game. When he did, it looked like his arm was coming all the way off because it had actually broken his arm in the first game.
Wow.
And he had played through, and his arm was like in half. But because I said, hey, you're okay, he believed he was okay with a broken arm and went out and had the best tournament he's ever had. And then we went straight to the emergency room after he got a cast put on. And, of course, his mom wasn't happy. But I can just say,
the mind.
Your mind can control the physical.
It's super powerful. Coming back to assets. So we're beginning this journey of 24 for people that are listening. How important do you feel, let's say something like credit score and credit rating, regardless of where you're at in life, How important do you think that is?
Credit score and credit rating are the two things my dad gave me advice when I was a young kid. He said, look, two things you can never change. And if you give your word to someone, keep it, and never, ever do anything that could injure your credit score. Whether you have money or not does not matter. Find a way to make that payment. If it means you have to go cut grass to be able to make sure you don't pay something late, go do that, because you cannot replace how important that credit report is. One of the guys running for governor right now, Mark Robinson, and I were talking not too long ago, and he came up to me and he said, look, when I got turned down for my first mortgage when I was trying to buy a property, it had nothing to do with discrimination. It had nothing to do with the banker not doing what they're supposed to do or anybody else. My credit score was horrible, and as a result of that, I failed. And so I had to go back, and instead of blaming it on everyone else, I had to realize I've got to go improve my credit score. If your credit score is already good, do everything you can to prepare it. If it's not perfect, I don't care where you are on the scale. People think, oh, I wouldn't care about mine right now. It's funny you said that. I called one of my best bankers this past week and said, look, I'm concerned because my credit score has gone down just a few points here and there recently, and I don't understand why. Well, I borrow an awful lot of money in the commercial side, so all of those banks all have to do inquiries every single year on my credit report.
Stuff adds up.
I only have one personal credit card, and I pay it off every month, and I never charge it anywhere near what the balance could be on it. And you should always keep them below 30%, but I don't even get to that. I get up to like 3 and 4% on it, and then pay it off, and I don't have a lot of debt. Mm-hmm. You would think, gosh, that guy's credit score would be perfect. No, what they've told me, if I don't take out a couple more revolving credit cards, all my vehicles we've paid cash for. You need some car loans. You've got to start, Jim, taking on more debt. And I'm like, gosh, man, I've fought my whole life not to have any debt. But if you don't have some debt, then you don't have anything for a credit bureau to report on, or not enough. Mm-hmm. And when your assets get as high as my assets have gotten, I need to have more debt in order for it to equal out. Because if I'm out doing, major subdivisions and I'm borrowing money from 7 or 8 or 10 different banks, not personally, business-wise. So it doesn't impact my personal credit report at all, other than they have to get an inquiry of my credit report before they'll do it, because I'm a personal guarantor on a corporate loan. But me paying that perfectly or doing anything great with it does not influence or have anything at all to do with my credit report. Now, if I ever don't pay it, that'll be a different story, because then it'll reflect negatively. But if you don't have personal debt, if you don't have a home loan, if you don't have car loans, if you don't have 3 or 4 credit cards, and that's what they're suggesting, and I have one, and I've had it since 1979, and the balance is, I can.
You got a Diners Club card, Jim?
What I can get is ridiculous. I could buy a house with what they've given me available credit,
sure,
and I never approached 3 or 4% every month in borrowing it. That's not bragging. That's just saying that's my ignorance. I was trying, like my parents, have your house paid off, be debt free, let cash be king. Cash is king, but it doesn't help your credit report.
That's true. And again, we could probably do a whole podcast on credit, but the moral of the story is credit is very important, because even if you're a waitress at the Ruth Chris here, your auto insurance premium may be impacted by your credit, your deposits, your rates that you
homeowner's
pay,
insurance,
your
everything.
homeowner's insurance, all of those things are impacted positively or
The
negatively.
interest rate you pay versus someone else. Like, there, even though you're qualified to buy, if you have a 625 credit score and another person has an 800, the 800 is going to get a better credit score sometimes. Now, they have in the past
Better interest rate.
Better interest rate. I'm sorry.
Yep.
In the last 2 years, they have done some things to adjust that, which don't really make sense. Like, if I have an 800 plus credit score, there are actually some dings, and I pay a higher interest rate. And if I'm at 625, I get a lower interest rate. And that doesn't make sense because I worked it out my whole life. So there have been some things that have been adjusted by the market that aren't fair in that direction.
Well, that's the whole redistribution, controlling the outcome, which we're not going to go into that, so YouTube doesn't censor us.
No, and I don't even mean to bring it up other than.
But it's true. It's fact.
I believe wherever you are, if you have a 780 credit score, you should be concerned about why isn't it 800? If you have a 400, why isn't it 600? Wherever you are, your credit matters. Your credit you should look at very similar to just your word. When you tell someone something, do they trust you? Well, trust and credit kind of go together. I think they're similar.
Well, it's when you break it down, credit is your credibility. And if you're in the top 10% of credit, you should be in the top 10% of interest rates because you're a lower risk. It's no different than, and again, it's common sense, which is maybe not so common anymore. But if I'm, 300 pounds, I smoke all day, I drink 10 Cokes a day, and I don't work out, I don't take vitamins, and there's someone over here that is in great shape, they work out, they're taking vitamins, they're not smoking, they're not doing these obviously bad things. One of us has a higher risk, and the higher risk person, common sense says they're going to have to pay more premium for their health insurance versus the healthier person. And it's the same thing. It's just financial.
That's right. Because, all of these things are set up so that you don't pay for them till you need them. Well, unfortunately, if your health's really bad and you really needed the insurance, you're not going to be able to get that same rate, and you're going to pay more, and you're the one who really needs it. That's why we have to, not just in health, physical health, mental health, and financial health, we have to keep a checks and balances with ourselves. Those three areas we need to be worrying about all three at the same time, because I may walk in and a person who's doing business with me looks at me and says, "Oh my gosh, you're in such poor health. I'm afraid you won't live long enough to sell my home." It impacts you everywhere.
Yeah, that's true. So one of the assets we're talking about is how do we move forward in 24 is having good credit. And there's lots of information out there. And something we were talking about that I'll just mention that I'll have like the Hurricanes. Today is August 2nd. I've got season tickets. They hit my American Express for $700 or whatever it was yesterday. I've already made a payment. It hasn't even cleared yet because I like that when I have all this available credit on my bureau, I pay it off immediately to where they haven't even, it's a pending charge and I've already made a payment to the American Express. Because when my credit report comes out for August, it'll have 0 on all of the credit cards because I pay it off. I literally don't go a week without zeroing out credit card debt because I like the zeros because my score's higher. And like you said, as a business owner, you not only have your personal stuff you're dealing with, but you're carrying the weight of the company if you want loans, if you want vehicles sometimes, until you get it to the point where it's the corporation has its own credit that can stand on its own 2 feet. But even then, I'm looking at doing some stuff that I'm going to have to personally guarantee it. So,
well, it doesn't hurt you. I want to make sure that the general public hears this. You actually should keep about a 30% balance on each of those cards to have the most efficient credit score. I don't. I pay mine off completely, and I pay 3 and 4 times a month like you do because I don't want to pay that interest. And you don't have to pay any interest if you pay it off before the interest is earned, and that's been my methodology. But the real truth in credit score, as long as you charge it up to 30% and then pay it down, get it up to 30 and then pay it down. Don't ever charge a card up 100% or above 30. Every time you go above 30% of whatever that credit card is, it dings you on your credit. But if you're at 2 and 3%, like I am every single month, even though I pay it off every month, they see where your balance goes to. They actually want it to go to that 30% every single month, because if it doesn't get to that level, then I've got, let's say it's $1 million I'm talking about. I've got $1 million worth of available credit I'm not using. The credit bureau looks at that as negative because I have not used what's available, and I could tomorrow, despite the fact that, I'm 60 years old, that I haven't done that in 60 years. Tomorrow I could if I wanted to. That's their fear, and that's how it impacts the credit negatively. So all of my bankers, all the people who do credit for us, tell us keep it about a 30% balance. Don't ever go over it, because if every time you go over it, now you've dinged your credit. Keep it about 30% on all cards. Charge it up to that level. It's okay to pay it off every month, but try to get up to that charge level.
Well, as far as what you're actually charging every
Yes.
month, yeah. But not necessarily carrying
Not
the
carrying
balance.
the balance at all.
Yeah.
No.
And-
But if you don't show that you're using it, like if you get a card and
definitely.
you use 1% of it, doesn't do you one bit of good.
Yeah. And again, this is not a credit podcast, but it is a factor. If you're going to win, it's foundational to have great credit, and there's lots of content. The principle is learn how to grow your credit score into a very healthy
Well,
range.
even though it's not credit counseling, you can't do anything without it, because you're going to run into a roadblock every time you turn a corner.
So if you're not 750 plus, start gearing up and getting more information to get that foundation. Another thing I think you calculate before you start figuring out how to move forward is, what are your liabilities? What would be your thoughts about evaluating your liabilities as you're going forward?
Truthfully, every time I decide I'm going to do something new, and this might be old school, I put, okay, what are all the problems I see? Debt, whatever the thing is, I've got my negatives. I put the positives on the other side. I don't know why, but for me, the negatives have never outweighed the positive in anything. So it's hard for me to decide not to try everything. But I do want to balance it out. And, so for me, when I think more positively, if I don't have about 3-to-1 positive versus negative, if it's a 50-50 or it's a coin flip as to whether to go forward or not to, then I don't go forward. But I do believe you have to stack out, okay, here are the things that could go wrong if I do this. Not so that I'm living into them, but so that when they do occur, I realize it's normal and I can work past it, because I pre-prepared myself that it can happen. Like, for example, if I move into a new building and I am not thinking already that everybody on my team needs to have a key fob, then I can guarantee you somebody's going to call me on the weekend and I'm going to have to go let them into a building. That's a simple example, but if I don't prepare for that and ahead of time, maybe put a lockbox somewhere on the building where there's a key fob in it, then I'm going to be pulling myself off of a baseball game or watching a UFC fight and having to rush to the office to make sure someone can get in. Small negative, but it is a negative. And there's nothing wrong with viewing what can go wrong in something. And I always do it so that when I'm in the middle, I can prepare around it. I think a lot of people, though, if they enter in any contract, and this is something for people to know, you cannot make a contract completely represent your side and be perfect. You can't, because there are at least one other person's involved in that contract you're getting into, or there wouldn't be the need for a contract. If both people's interests aren't represented, then the contract's going to get like those scales out of whack one way or the other. So you know in advance, if you're going to form a contract with someone, that part of it's not going to be to your best interest. It's going to be to the other person's. But hopefully they're enough each way that you feel balanced out.
How important do you think investing in yourself is in terms of like, trying to win in 24 and beyond?
If you're not investing in yourself, and by investing, I mean, like you do, education. If I am not spending money, and a lot of it isn't money, it's an investment in listening to podcasts, for example, or reading books online, or having other people send you books, and even though it's not something you would have necessarily bought, read it. There is nothing wrong with hearing something you don't agree with, because it helps you get your opinions more defined.
What would your advice be to folks that maybe money's really tight, but they want to improve their mindset? You already mentioned podcasts and things like that. I just think the internet is so rich with information.
Beyond that, I would tell people, don't be afraid to ask other people for help. There is nothing more complimentary to me than someone asking for my help. Now, when you ask, be sure that you let the person really express how they can help you. Like a lot of times, someone will ask me for help, or they'll ask me the answer to something, and they already have a preconceived answer in their own mind. And I start talking to them, and I realize that. I'm like, I don't even know why you asked me, because you really didn't want my opinion or my help or my advice. You wanted me just to reconfirm what I believe is a negative message you're portraying. You figured it out. Go down that line if you want, but come back and talk to me if you really want to talk it out, because while I may not know it all, I think you're just waiting for people to validate the negativity in your own mind.
And be open to that criticism if it comes. Self-awareness is something that I think is one of the most important things that I would say business owners or sales professionals, you need to have self-awareness. And you touched on that earlier. When you have a failure, or you go to a sales call and you didn't get the deal, are you thinking about all the things that happened? Or are you just blaming them? Are you blaming your product or this? Or are you thinking, I could have done this better. I could have built more rapport early on.
As an employer, as a business leader, when someone brings something to me and it's obviously not worked, and I ask that person, tell me about what happened. If the first thing out of their mouth is someone else did something or something else happened, and there's an excuse, because there's an excuse for everything. I mean, let's just get that out there right now. If you give me a situation, I can come up with a book of excuses. If the person looks me eye to eye and says, I didn't do a good job, I got to do better, I'm more likely to re-employ that person, because they at least realize they were at the core of it. They can't determine the outcome. They can't change the other person. Whatever else these other contributing factors were, they were there. They can control their impact in it. Gosh, I'll tell you really why it failed. When the person on the other side brought this up, I didn't really deal with it effectively. Had I headed that off, it wouldn't have empowered him to say, no, I made a mistake. That's who I want working for me. I don't want the person that when a calendar invite gets sent out, and it only gets sent out to 2 people, and there were 10 people that were supposed to be on it. I don't want to hear, oh, well, so and so only told me to put this person on it. So and so, 5 minutes ago, you told me that you were the one responsible for this. Now you're telling me everybody else that did something wrong so that the meeting didn't occur. We've already had one meeting. There were 10 people at that meeting. We talked about in that meeting, it's going to be regularly occurring. You should assume immediately that all of those people are invited, unless someone tells you not to invite one of those people. Mm-hmm. That's a small example, but a person would take that and then blame everybody, or go home, gosh, that person was so mean to me today. I did everything exactly like I was instructed, and they really didn't.
Right.
Or they put space, time, and distance. And, like, for example, if someone checks your messages today for you, you ask them to, and they check them and they write them all down, but they never give them to you. Or if it seems like there's something critical that's going on and you're not available right then, and they don't reach out to that other party, they shouldn't even have checked the messages, mm-hmm. because they didn't help. Instead, they may have exacerbated it, because now when you go to check them, they're no longer there, or they're saved. And if they're on your saved messages, you assume someone else is taking care of it. And then when you reach out to that person on the other end, they're going to jump you. Well, that's not their fault either. When I allow someone else to do something on my behalf, mm-hmm. when the next person says, hey, why didn't this happen? If I say, well, that's so-and-so's fault, or that's this person's fault, I lose credibility with the person I'm talking to right that moment. Instead of saying, you know what, doesn't matter how it didn't happen, I apologize for it right now. Mm-hmm. Let's move forward.
And that's good business owner 101. And I guess it's good human 101, is that we have responsibility in almost every situation. If you enter into a business deal and the other person doesn't uphold to their end of the contract, doesn't do this, doesn't do that, well, you entered into business with them. You have some responsibility there. So we can always impact our situation, and we could talk a lot about that. But I would say maybe one of the principles there is, if you're really trying to crush it in 24 and beyond, improve your accountability. You're responsible for everything, and that's only going to help you. And it's actually good news, because if your numbers, let's say you're a realtor and your volume isn't where you want it to be, and you say that's because it's my fault, that's a good message, because now you can change it if it's your fault.
You know what I find makes people fail more often than anything, though? They're competing out of their weight class. And let me explain that to you, or how I see that. I know we talk in sports vernacular mm-hmm. sometimes, but if you are a beginning agent and you are trying to compete with me, so, by competing out of my weight class, what I mean by that, I'm going to use myself as the example. Mm-hmm. The 24-year-old me, I can look back. I was at one of my first conventions I'd ever attended, a national convention. And there was these guys running around with these little blue ribbons on, and there were only 10 of them in the room. And they were the pinnacle. They were the top 10 agents in the country in that thing. And I was looking at them. I'm my third year in real estate, and I'm looking at them and trying to figure out why I didn't get a blue ribbon this year. And then later on in the conference, they called out the top 1,000 people to walk across the stage, and I wasn't one of the 1,000, much less one of the 10. But I was sitting there, and I was, like a lot of people do, reflecting on, gosh, I should be this, that, and the other. I know how hard I'm working. I was dream setting, not goal setting at that second. But I reached out, and I the owner of our company at the time, I said, look, can you do me a favor? Can you tell me what the bottom person in the top 10 in units in GCI, what did they do last year? So I know what I've got to do for next year. My owner laughed in my face. I mean, literally
Mr. Encouragement.
laughed in my face. And fortunately, a lady who works with me right now, Nancy Harner, who I've known for 40 some years, was there nearby and heard it. And she knew what a drive I had or an engine I had. And she said, when we get back, I'll figure that out for you and I'll let you know. Now, I put it all in her hands, not in my own hands. But at the same time, I was going to goal set for something beyond what a normal person could do, except here's what I did with that. I got those numbers from her a few weeks later. I took those numbers and I posted them on the mirror in my bathroom so that every time I walked in, I knew exactly where I had to go that year. Well, to get there, I broke that down into, okay, here's how many sales I have to make every week in order for that to happen every day. Here's how many people I have to talk to make that happen. I went from not being in the top 1,000 people at the time with the company I was with to the next year when I came back, I was number 6 and number 8 in the U.S. because I had a laser focused goal that, and I'll tell you something that happened that year. I won this big contest that year in sales, and I wasn't married yet, and the trip was for a trip to Hawaii. And the Thursday before that trip was going to happen on Friday, and I had a date going with me, and I was going to have a great time. On Thursday, a guy called me, and he was coming into town, which ended up being an explosive piece of business in my career. And on Thursday, this guy said, I'm going to be there Friday, Saturday, and Sunday without pause. I said, okay, well, I'll pick you up at the airport, not even thinking about this vacation anymore. And I didn't even call the girl I was going with until Friday morning. Our plane was leaving at 4:00 in the afternoon. I called her Friday morning and I said, look, I'm going to let you have the tickets and everything else. And I'm going to give you, and I literally was borrowing money off my credit card at the time, at that age, to give her the money to go on the trip with another friend. Didn't care. I didn't ask who you were taking or anything else, and let her go on that trip because I knew to reach the goals I had to reach, I had to sacrifice. And I was willing to sacrifice that. Obviously, she wasn't that. Hopefully she's not listening. It's not that she wasn't a nice person. It's that interfered with my success goals I had set for myself. And even though anybody looking from the outside would have said, these are ridiculous goals, there's no way to achieve them, I set out a plan. I literally held myself accountable to the point I wouldn't let myself fail. So I went, in 1 year, I quintupled my business in 1 year. Now, when I went back that next year, I had no idea where I ranked in the new paradigm because I just knew what they had done last year. And they didn't tell us at the time where our standings were or who was where. I was just trying to beat what they had done the year previous, realizing in my own mind they've probably improved too. So I may still not hit the top 10, but I'm gonna at least do what they did last year. And then when I got there, and it was the funnest thing I've ever been to because they didn't tell you ahead of time where you ranked. And instead, 11 people were lined up in the back, like 11 instead of 10. 2 of them had tied, but we were literally 11 people in the back, not in a random order. And you stood behind these numbers, and you didn't know where you were in those numbers. And a lot of people, when they jumped out, and I was 6 and 8 that year, a lot of people would have been like, oh man, I've reached. Now, it felt great for that moment. Do not get me wrong. But one of the people who jumped out of one of them on the other end, that jumped out of the number 1 number, I watched how much more excited he was to be there. And I also reflected on, he doesn't look that much different than me. Why couldn't I have gone there? I didn't set my goal high enough. So the following year when I came back, I was number 2 and number 1 because I had focused my goal there. The following year after that, I was at 1, and I've stayed there consistently for an awful long time. But I did that because that was something I wanted, and I wanted it desperately enough to plan it out. Because when you come from meager beginnings, you're looking for any type of success, anything that tells you that you're okay. Because all of us want to just be okay. But most people I meet, instead of goal setting, are dream setting. Dream setting means you say you want to be, today I want to be 150 pounds and I want to be able to run a 10-second 100. I can say that and I can dream that, but if I don't do anything to put an action plan in place to go achieve that goal, that's not a goal. Most people, 99% of people, say that they're goal setting. I'm going to goal set for this year, but then they never break down that goal to make it achievable. Put steps in place so that you can get wherever you are. And the other thing they're doing, when I say competing outside their weight class, their goal is now to beat me. They have no idea how much I'm going to sacrifice. They have no idea, it doesn't matter when, the commitment I'm going to put towards that success. They do know what they're willing to do. People should compete with themselves, not other people. Even though I told you how I got to the pinnacle I went to, I did, and I was trying to compete with others. I wasn't really, and I was too ignorant at the time to realize those actions I put in place, the steps I had to take to get to that goal, were actually competing with myself because I had never done these things before, and now I've set them out, and I could have put the steps there and never taken any of them, but instead I was like, you know what? There's nothing that's going to take priority over this for me. That is my goal. And I'm going to, if I have to give up vacations, if, somebody asked me to go on a trip to my dream destination, but I can sell a house instead, or in this case, the one I told you about, the gentleman, his name's Jeff, and I won't mention his last name, but had I not hooked into him, there used to be a company named Nortel. I did all the relocation for years for that company from that one meeting, that one weekend, and it changed the complete direction of my goals. Were much easier to achieve that year because of that one instance. Had I gone on that vacation to Hawaii, I'm sure I'd have had a great time. I'm sure I'd have come back telling everybody it was a trip of a lifetime, all these other things. But you know what? Not going enabled me to reach my real goals, not be dissuaded by something temporary. And most people I talk to who do this goal setting, they have these vision boards. And I almost, like I don't want to distract people from doing these things, but they spend so much time, and this thing's so pretty. They become artists. They've drawn up this beautiful vision board. And then I go back and look at that person 6 months later, and other than having that board sticking on their wall, there was no game plan in place to do any of the things on there. And I can go back and say, okay, you had over here, you wanted to achieve this. What did you do to achieve that? People, one thing I will tell you, and people are going to be disappointed when I say this work-life balance everybody talks about, it's not real. Everybody you meet who has super achieved has worked harder, has put more time in, has sacrificed to achieve. You get to do that kind of stuff once you've made it, not before you've made it. And say you made it. Like, if you ever get comfortable where you are, guess what happens? You don't continue to rise.
Shrink.
You start declining. It is much more difficult to stay on top than it is to get on top. So I have people that tell me every year, "Oh, I'm going to knock you off this year. I'm chasing you down this year." And you know what? I'm still chasing me. So and fired up to get better I'm not worried about them.
Mm-hmm.
They're in my rearview mirror. Why am I going to look back? If by the way, if you're driving a car and you're in a car race and you're driving diligently and all of a sudden you think, "I wonder if anybody's behind me," and you look back, you're going to slow down intentionally because you're going to crash otherwise while you're looking back. While you're doing that, they're going to gain on you and pass you. If you are in any type of business, no matter what it is, we talked about this earlier in the UFC. Leon Edwards lost his championship the other week. He didn't look like the same fighter in that fight that he did in the previous fight I had just witnessed him in. Mm-hmm. The one I witnessed him, he looked, they were saying best fighter in the world, best pound for pound. I mean, I was hearing all these monikers. But that next fight, he wasn't prepared for. You could tell he came to the ring with an entitlement. I am this. Look, when I walk in and people acknowledge me for my past successes, you know what I tell them? I got a whole storage bin of all those trophies with them stuck in it somewhere, and I don't go back and look at them ever. I don't know why I haven't had the courage to throw them away because they are history. And I'm moving forward right now. So what I achieved last year has no bearing. December 31st, when this year is over, my next year begins. What I did last year, other people may be impressed with it. All I'm thinking is, and the only way I use that is if I don't better last year, I'm getting worse. Okay, I've done that for 41 years in a career. In 41 years, I've had 2 years that I didn't improve on the year previous. Those 2 years, I didn't give myself a pass. I didn't say, "Oh, well, this happened, COVID happened, or I had health scares, or I did this, or I did that, or I did the other." I looked at it and said, failure, over it, go back. And I take that year completely out. I go back to the year before that. Now that's the year I'm competing with. My failure year, I should be able to blow past that because I didn't achieve what I had set out to achieve the year previous. So that's how I run. Now I have, other people in the top 25 in my particular business every year will call me and say, or I'll be on a panel with them. And they'll look right at me and say, "I'm going to knock you off this year. I'm going to be the one that does it to you." And I'm thinking to myself, well, you will if I stop competing with me. Because right now, you only know what you did and how much better you got. When I was trying to get in my shoes, I had a lady who, and I'll give her full recognition, Phyllis Waborski, was my icon locally that I was trying to surpass. And I didn't know what she did or didn't do, but I remember the first time I ever sold 9 houses in a day, two of them were hers. And I went over and delivered one of the offers. Back in the old days, you didn't have any way to communicate. You had to deliver offers. And I delivered 2 of them to her house. And the second one I delivered, she said to me as a young kid, "You'll be the one that replaces me one day." The difference in her saying that and me saying it was astronomical because in my mind, wow, the person I'm trying to emulate is telling me they believe I'm going to be that person. Now, that could have made my head swell. It could have deterred me, but it drove me even more that, wow, she sees me in the mirror. That means I'm at least in play. The people who talk to me, majority of the ones that come at me that way, I never even if I was going to glance back, TBJ until the last couple of years printed this list to tell where everybody stood. So at the end of the year, I might look at it, see who else was wherever they were. But I didn't take a lot of time doing it.
And that's Triangle Business Journal. It's a
That's right. I apologize.
Raleigh periodical, just for anybody listening.
But people would do that to me, and I would say, you know what? I hope you are the one. You got to prove it, not talk it. Do it, commit to your business, and then you can talk about it. And, I have people around me that I've even trained personally that will tell me at certain points that they're this and they're that and they're the other. And you know what? I don't believe, and I think I think all of us should believe we're the best person to help whoever we're trying to help. We should have that confidence. But if you ever get to the point that you say, I'm the this or I'm the that, then you're making a mistake. A couple of years ago, my marketing department came up with this GOAT campaign for me, and I didn't even know they were doing it, to be honest with you. And I went to the Fenton and Cary one day, and I saw this life-size poster of me up on a wall with all this other stuff talking about me being the GOAT. I was so embarrassed. I didn't even want to go to dinner over there because I was like, oh, Lord, somebody's going to think I really believe this of myself. Now, truth is, I can back it up that I have actually, in the history of North Carolina, sold the most houses that anybody's ever sold and the biggest volume. Now, but that doesn't make me anything. That just says I put a lot of effort in over a long period of time, and you would hope that somebody would have some modicum of success.
Sure.
But if I believed I was the GOAT in whatever that second, it would keep me from being able to go forward to become whatever I can become next. I'm looking right now as diligently for what's next as I was when I start, more so, because I'm better prepared to put the tools in place to go do whatever I want to do.
Listening to you, Jim, I'm reminded. There's two things I want to ask here. When I hear what you're saying, because you're always looking forward, and you listen to Tom Brady, and he always said, "What's your favorite ring?" And he says, "The next one." What do you believe is the difference between maybe an average producer and somebody that is at that type of intense focus? What do you think causes the difference?
That they didn't follow the steps they put in place, that they had this dream vision, not a real goal. And most people set their goals, when they really set a goal, they set them too low and too easy to achieve. And then when they do achieve them, and they even go past them just a little bit, they relax. Oh, I reached my goal for the year. I can go on vacation the rest of the year. I never did that.
Versus resetting a goal. And
or in my mind, when it's you're competing with, I say to everybody, if you were going to get better right now, take your scorecard. Now, if you're brand new and you don't even have a previous year to work from, then maybe you do just need to, okay, who is around my office? Who is the person that's newest, who's achieved a little bit? What did they do? And now I can aim at their target until the first year's over. After the first year's over, I've got my target. And I look back and, oh, that was pretty nothing. So to achieve more than that, and what I used to try to do is achieve, especially in the beginning, I want to do 20% more than I did the previous year. That was once I'd gotten somewhere. Now, the bus I drove to get to the top 10 at the beginning, I don't recommend that for people. At the time, and I'm older now and I've lost hair, but at the time I had the fullest head of hair you've ever seen. And I got this alopecia from stress because I was working so hard. My hair was falling out in circles because I didn't care what it did to me physically, personally. I was sticking to my goal to the point, even if it injured my health, I was going to achieve it. Now, I don't know if that kind of rabid, I'm going to go at it that hard is necessarily good, but at the time, it's what I had to do to drive. Now, where a few years into that, when I had been the top agent for a period of time, I started realizing I was unapproachable because I was so laser focused and so driven that I didn't even know people were around me, because I could walk down a hall and my brain was working on 50 things, and you might say hello, and I wasn't trying to be rude. I literally didn't see the other person. And, so I got to a stage in my career when I realized I'm successful because of other people, and I need other people, to be around me. And that's really when I set out and formed a team, because when I first got to the top, they didn't have, okay, there's an individual best, there's a small team best, a medium, a large, and a mega team best. There were 10 people, however they chose to get there. And I was the only one of those 10 that didn't have any assistants, didn't have any team members. The girl who won, who said, at the time, she did it all by herself, had 19 agents working for her already, she was one of the first people to form a team. Rather than saying, I can't compete with her because she's got all this, I decided to take them all on, and eventually won without. And then I realized, how much easier would it be if I empowered other people to help me on my journey? And that's when I started doing it. And once I learned to reach out and accept help, it's amazing how much better I got quicker. I was killing myself over here alone and not realizing it didn't really have the same benefit. And then all of a sudden I said, I'm going to ask this one person. And I started doing it. And, one of the guys I really admire, and he and I talk a lot about the business, is a guy named Tom Ferry today. Well, I knew his dad when I was a young kid, and I met Tom when he was a young kid. And I, unfortunately, was so focused on myself at the time, I didn't see him. And today, I tell you, I enjoy when we get to do stuff together, when we talk, man, having that other person to bounce stuff off of. Or there's a guy in Philadelphia, if anybody's buying a house in Philadelphia, his name is Mike McCann, the real estate man. And Mike is absolutely me in another world. It's a guy that we bounce off each other. He is still the same guy he was when we started. We're the exact same age, same guy that he was in his business way back when. And I admire so much how he's done his career, and he's Keller Williams' #1 agent. And I admire how well he's done and succeeded, and how he's done the parts of his life that I constantly, he's like one of my heroes. He tells me I'm one of it. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with your heroes, you being their hero, at the same time. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. So I think one of the principles I'm taking away from this is if you're trying to get ahead, you're trying to crush 24 and beyond, not only have your dreams and your vision board, all those things are good, but have your plan. And what I'm really hearing is have your discipline, have your plan broken down to bite-sized pieces, and take a bite every day, take a bite every hour, take a bite every minute, because you are clearly intensely driven for whatever underneath the current caused you to be that driven. That's maybe a whole nother podcast, but the reality is you probably did a lot of things when you didn't feel like it, because you were driven by your goals and your plan.
And it wasn't driven by it, stuck to it. Just the biggest thing is most people don't step out of the front door. They don't make the first call. They accept when the person didn't answer that first time. They never think about, instead of thinking the person was busy doing something else, they think, oh, they didn't want to talk to me. They probably put me on call block. And I think the opposite. I think, well, they didn't realize it was my phone ringing. If they had known I was calling, they certainly would have answered. And when I finally get them on the phone and they say, well, you realize you've called me 20 times. Oh, I didn't realize I'd called you that much, to be honest with you, but I'm glad you finally picked up. And now and then there's, well, why'd you track me down that hard? I did because I felt like I could really help you, and can say it that way. And then somebody will say, well, that's because you're Jim Allen and you think you can. I've always been Jim Allen,
right?
Good, bad, or indifferent.
And you've always felt like I could help them.
That's right.
As good as anybody.
And that is the moniker at the end of your heart. But these people trying to get somewhere, I really wish, and you said it a moment ago, break it down into bite-sized portions, because what needs to happen, if you have a goal of buying a house and you need to make $10,000 a month to be able to do whatever your goal is, or 1,000 or 500, whatever that number is, you have to look at what's your average size sale that you've been making. Don't look at what you project you want it to be. What has it been? Okay, how many of those do I have to do to achieve the minimum thing I want to achieve? And another thing I've done, and I think this can be helpful to a lot of folks, I always look at what's my average sales price. What do I do most often? Okay, whatever that average is, how many of those do I need to achieve something? I don't say, well, I did one that was way up here last year, and I did a bunch that were way down here last year. How many of each of those do I have to? Because I know it's going to be an average of all that. But if I say, well, gosh, I could make $5 million sales, and I would get to my goal immediately. Well, if only 2 $5 million sales occurred in your whole market last year, and you weren't any of those, but you're shooting for those 5, your goal's going to get interrupted easily. If your average sales price is pretty achievable and you did enough of those, obviously, to get what your goal was last year, then if your goal is to improve yourself 20%, you only have to do 20% more of those things in order to do that. Okay, do I have enough time to ride that many buyers around this week? If I'm going to do it, what days am I going to work with them? What days am I going to concentrate on listings? I have to break it down incrementally. And now once I've done that, okay, here's step 1. Here's step 2. Can't get away from the plan. The action plan should be written and hold yourself accountable. And that's why I did it on my mirror. Look, as I got closer to my goal, I didn't relax. I went in overpower because I was trying to reach the number 10 guy. Instead, I reached who had been at number 3 the year before, but they had all gone up. So I got to number 6. And in the other one, I reached to number 5, but I that year it ended up being number 8 because that guy had gotten better. The one thing I want to get back to, and I want to make sure, because I am cognizant that we're talking about 2024, but I'm not really. I'm talking about 2025 right now, because 2024, we're midway through. And, most people have already, whatever their goal was for this year, if they've already achieved it, they're on vacation somewhere. Or if they didn't have a goal to begin with, now they're going to put an action plan in place that's going to be for a 12-month period. And when they don't get every step, they're going to feel disappointed and not want to go forward. But, my belief is if you've had a minimum of 1 year in whatever business you're in, if the next year, and this is simple terms, if you set about that 20% better than I did the previous year is what my achievable goal is. Now you mix out whatever your averages were. You know how many more of each of those things you've got to do. You know what effort it took you to get to each of those steps. That's really very achievable year over year, every single year. Now, when you've done that for 40 years in a row, it starts to feel like, oh, wow, getting 20% better. But, I've never let myself down from that. That is what we attack and how we want to get there. The only thing that's differed now for me is now I say, well, I have to develop this many lots rather than having to get this many listings. I have to create this many more opportunities, because at a certain point during my career, when I realized people were saying people aren't listing their houses right now, not this thing's not happening, that thing's not happening, I realized I could use that as an excuse, but I could start creating my own new listings too. I could take my money that I was leaving sitting in a savings account, or that I was planning on going on my next trip with, I could reinvest it in my business and become the next serial entrepreneur that backed builders, that developed lots, that did tear downs. I mean, why watch what, I admire when other people are doing things, but if you admire it, why not go do it as well? And that's one of the things I've learned to do in my career path as I've gone is, gosh, I'd like to do that someday. Well, today is that day. Everybody, I hear people always, oh yeah, I'm going to do that in the future one day. But then you walk into a grocery store, back when Amway was a big deal, right? You walk into a grocery store and you notice somebody staring at you, where every one of those people were inviting me to an Amway meeting. Every time I could turn around, that's what was happening. Now, I admire their tenacity for doing it on one end, but the majority of those people and the majority of the world is looking for the get-rich-quick scam. If you say, hey, what's your goal? Well, I want to be rich. What is rich?
Right.
How do you define it? Rich is different to every person. Rich may be for me, like I'll give you rich for me last week. My youngest son asked me to go to church instead of watching it online last Sunday, and we all did. And I can tell you that we had gotten complacent like everybody else during COVID, where we were doing it online versus being there in person sometimes. Either Jonathan, my pastor, had the best message ever, or being there in person and experiencing it was so much better. That was rich for me last week. So we define rich differently,
Sure.
but everybody thinks, oh, I want to make a lot of money. What do you want to do with it? What if you make a lot of money? Are you just going to put it in a storage bin? Because when you die, I don't know if anybody's told you this, you don't get to take it with you.
It stays here, yeah.
If your goal in gaining wealth or gaining things is to help the next generation, not only your next generation, but the next generation, I find God sees those goals as better goals and helps you to achieve them more. And I can tell you, like I said earlier, I am working now for the other people on my team and not for me. Not for my kids, I'm working for the other people on my team's success that haven't figured theirs out yet. Because if I can in any way help any of them, and I'll be honest, at 1:00, an event's happening at the Boys and Girls Club in Wake Forest. My team is doing a thing we do. This is their summer fling, and they're going to go have a ball today, and members of my team are going to get to enjoy it with them. At the same time, I'm doing it for them. I'm doing it so that they get a chance. I got a young lady named Nora that's working with me right now that's on a scholarship to ECU, and we gave her a scholarship out of JAG as well. And then we've just given out our second one this year in my mom's name. We do it every year to different people from the Boys and Girls Club. But Nora is in her second year of college coming up, had a successful first year, made great grades. At the end of the year, called us and said, hey, can I come intern with you? And so she's been interning with us this year and hasn't necessarily had that much interaction with me, But yesterday I was in a marketing meeting with my team, and Stephanie, who's the head of my new homes division, and Dan and Christine all said at the same time, man, I'll tell you what, it's great we're doing this event tomorrow at the Boys and Girls Club, because Nora is the hardest working young girl we've ever had as an intern. And man, what a great purpose we're serving by doing that. And you know what? It is. So that's what this stage of my business is for. It's not when your goals are for others and you want to be able to give back a certain amount. I mean, people used to tell me about philanthropic efforts. When I didn't have any money, I didn't even know what that meant. Mm-hmm. What I realize now is when God takes the time to bless you, if you're not giving back to other people equal to what he's giving or more, then the blessings don't hit you the same way. I mean, God, I think, sits in heaven and says, I know this person, and this person are going to do well with the things I put in front of them, so I'll put more in front of them. I think he cares and blesses us all. I think he tries to help us all. But I think some people care about making sure he's proud too, and making sure they're doing enough that way. So my new part of my career, my new goals, when I sit down every year, I think, how many more new charities can I help? And when I say charities, not nonprofits, people I can see the direct results of, like I see in Nora. I mean, people I can really look at and say,
you can see the impact.
The impact
there's
is there.
Real impact going on.
We talked about this in here last time I was in here. We gave away some money to some local things last week's, but every one of them that was a great idea, I made sure that the person who came up with the idea had to go put themselves involved in giving the money, even though that wasn't their money. I put them in it so that you're not just throwing money at a wall. You get the impact. You get to see it. You get to feel it. You get to know that it happened. That's more important. And that's kind of, and like, I'm reminded of that. I'm going to go back and ask Angie, hey, how cool was it when you went to the grocery store, and what did they tell you?
You know, if you don't mind, Jim, I'd like to pause for a second, not pause the actual podcast, but two things. I'm really trying to listen and really trying to dig into the principles and thinking, how can we communicate this? If you've been listening to this, hopefully you heard this, but if not, I'm going to repeat it. When you're thinking about as a realtor business, I've heard a lot of people say there's not houses on the market, this and that. How can I get listings? Their people aren't selling their houses. You took that thought process to another level. Well, I'll create some houses. So it's that old military adapt, overcome, improvise. You saw that okay, I have goals and I have a plan and I have a mission. I have less resources available to accomplish the mission. So I'm going to find a way to create more resources to help me accomplish my mission. And some people might say, well, that's not my job. Well, you made it your job, and that's why you're successful. That's a really important principle. And I want to ask you, if you're watching this, how can you create more listings in your business, in your field, whatever you're doing? How do you create more of something that may not be there flowing like it might normally be? So that was one of the things I heard that I thought was really good. The second one, and I want to share something as well, was that you were talking about how you earned a vacation, and there was a opportunity that came up, and you passed on the vacation. And I'm here to tell you, if you're listening, how many people are going to pass on a vacation to Hawaii to go work with this client? My gut instinct tells me probably 90+% of the people are going on vacation, and they try to reschedule the customer when it's convenient, when I'm back from my vacation, and you might have lost that customer. But you went the extra mile. And I can just tell you from being in sales, when I didn't feel like knocking on the extra door, when it was raining, when it was doing whatever it is that I didn't feel like doing it, but I pushed through it, it's almost like God or the universe or whatever your belief system is, it's almost like you push through and you get rewarded. And I can't tell you how many times that's happened to me. And that story reminds me of that when I didn't feel like doing something, but I'm taking those little Jim Allen bites and I'm going after my goals and I'm putting in the hours and the time, especially when it's inconvenient. That's often where I'm curious. Do you feel like you get the biggest rewards during those time frames?
100%. And when you're saying that, it reminds me right this moment to be appreciative of the successes you have. It does get easier. Hey, here's the positive to say to everybody out there. If you work diligently, if you put a 5-year plan in place and you work every year for those 5 years to better yourself by 20%, when you get to year 6, it's going to become automatic because your business is going to grow on itself. I wanted it to happen overnight with me.
We all do.
But the truth is, once it starts growing and cannibalizing itself and growing and growing and growing, you almost can't stop the machine when it's happening.
The momentum. And you create that momentum. And I heard this described a long time ago. You brought up Amway. There's a guy named Joe Markowitz. I listened to a tape of his one time, and he talked about momentum. And he talked about this big boulder. And it might take everything you have to get it to just turn over just a little bit. But once you get it turned over, now it's easier to get the second roll. And then before you know it, down the line, you're just doing this, and the boulder is rolling. But it was that initial critical inertia that you're trying to create. I think I'm saying that right. But the hard part in being self-employed, if you're thinking about doing it, and I've told many people that were getting into real estate, I said the first 2 years are going to be the toughest. You look at the statistics on starting a business. The first 2 years, I did
70% failure.
Yeah, I did everything for like 6 or 7 years. You called the company on the website. I answered the phone because I didn't want to pay the answering service at the time. And really, couldn't, investing so many other things with my particular business model. But the principles are the same in a lot of cases. And that's when you're listening to this stuff and you're listening to a guy that's had extreme success like Jim. I hope you're listening to the principles and the things that created those, because they transcend industries. And even if you're a waitress at Ruth Chris, there are things you can listen to that Jim, you're sitting here listening. If you're listening with the intent to learn the principles, you're going to be successful at whatever you do.
Well, let me tell you, some of the people I learned the most valuable lessons from in my life were not the people you would have said that about. There was a young lady that was a waitress at Golden Corral, had been there for 20 plus years at the time I met her, and she was at the time probably in her mid 30s, but she'd already been working at Golden Corral for 20 years, had all these stock options, had all this, money set aside, that she was making so much money working there because of what the company had put in place. But I can tell you, she never lost focus of that. Every time I went into that particular Golden Corral, my kids loved it when they were young, but every time I went into that restaurant, she made everybody in her section smile. Every person around her felt her energy. And, I had no idea she was doing it, but she started talking to me about how she was saving money and the things she was doing with her money and how she was investing it. And, I tell everybody that this is my discussion point now. My money is employed. My money goes out wherever I send it. It's got a job. Some of my money comes back, disappoints me, and I decide not to deploy that anymore. But the ones that come back and they've really done a good job, I send it back out for some more. That's truly how you have to look at investing. People say, well, I want to do all this long range investing. maybe I haven't done as good a job of the long range ones. I've got things I've kept in place, and I just leave those things alone and let them gain money. None of those seem to make as much money as the ones when I re-employ my money in different things. Like I employ it in this time, and I get this amount of success out of it. Then I think, you know what, if I do these three things differently, maybe I'll have a better outcome next time. And so I throw it back out there and redeploy it again. The other thing that I want to encourage everybody listening, you want to be successful? The best way to be successful is help other people be successful. The best way to be successful is to be willing to share with others and form syndicates with yourselves. Like, everybody says, oh, I don't have enough money to do this or that or the other. You don't, but you've got 30 friends. Combine your efforts, make someone the lead. You probably do. Or find a person like me that says, hey, if you got people that want to do something, come to me. I'll let you invest in my stuff. I don't have to have all of anything. Anybody that wants to have it all typically is not going to be a great partner, and typically isn't going to ever achieve anything because they wanted to squeeze the last dime out of something and choke the process. I feel like, and I tell Allie in our investments, who runs my stuff, I say, look, as long as I get to keep 50% of the investment, I don't care if there's 85 other people on the other side of the investment. Don't give it all away. And the other reason I want to be 50% invested, I want to care about it. If 50% of the money and everything I do is me, then I know I care about mine, and it'll help me care about the other person's, but I like it. So a few times I had more people wanting to invest than 50%, and I let those go to 75% or 80% on their side, and I only had 20. And you know what? Those were some of the ones that were most successful, to be completely honest with you. And it didn't hurt me, and I still did okay. But a couple of the people that were invested said at the end, even though they'd made the greatest returns I could imagine, one of them made an 1,100% return. That person said to me at the end, well, I thought you had 50% of this. Allie told me that you only had 20, and didn't invest again, even though they made 1,100% return on their money, because I didn't do what I said I was going to do. And I did not, for me, I did it because so many people wanted to do it that I sacrificed me to help them, and it ended up hurting me.
Interesting. Well, I could definitely see where if somebody's investing and they know you've got some serious skin in the game, that gives them peace of mind as well.
And I don't want to not have it there.
Sure.
Like I've got friends of mine who've always told me, oh, let's always use other people's money. I don't want to be that guy.
Right.
If I don't believe in it enough to commit my own assets towards it, why should they?
Well, to me, it shows from an outsider point of view, it shows, hey, I'm in this to win it as well, and we're all going to lose if this doesn't go well.
Well, but people use the excuse too, Brian, that they don't have enough money to do anything. And I say, if you've got $1, you do. Because if you go combine that with, you might have to have more people you got to combine it with, but as many of those people as you can, then you do it. So in my investment stuff now, because I want them to work towards a goal, I require that people have $5,000 to be able to put in as a minimum, because it's a lot to keep up with if it's broken down further than that. But as long as they have that, I'll let them put it back in. And then, if I see they don't have that much, and it's something that we're buying, I'll give you an example. I was buying some lots or buying some houses from people I was going to tear down and do some new stuff with. And there wasn't like a commission being paid out or anything. And the person that brought it to me didn't have enough money to invest in it. So I said, okay, well, I got a way to achieve that. So even though I'd already worked my deal out with the seller, I raised the price by $5,000 so that, and me paying it so that there was a commission paid out to help that person get their first seed of investment money. And if nothing else, to pay their gas while they're waiting for this thing to happen. It's not going to happen for 2 years because, that's how long the investments take.
Well, the principle here is get your money working for you. And what I would say to this is, if you feel like you're listening to this and you don't have enough money, let me ask you some questions. What is your budget? How many lattes a month are you buying? How much are you working? Can you take on a part-time gig where you're making $15 an hour for 10 hours a week? There's $600 a month. Do that for a year, you got $6-7 sitting around ready to do something. So,
or could you, next time you're going to the store, easier to monitor. I'm going to a restaurant to eat today. Instead of ordering the large of it, if I order the medium size, can I take that savings and put it towards an investment? And if I do that for a year, how much money did I save to go? Everything in life, if it is too easy, you won't repeat it. Too easy means that was just a freak accident. I didn't have to prepare to succeed. If there are steps in place and you have to do something to achieve it, then you're more likely to repeat it.
Coming back to some of the stuff that we've talked about, kind of working towards wrapping this up here, because I do appreciate all the time you've put in on these two podcasts. There's a lot of talk about living wages, and I definitely want to touch on inflation before we get off the podcast. But to me, to have living wages, that narrative kind of makes it seem like businesses are doing something wrong. And I think it comes back to the self-awareness and accountability that if you want a living wage, you need to have living skills. How important do you think it is to develop your skills and have an inventory of skills that you bring to the table if you're going to be successful at anything?
In anything you do, that's the most important thing. And I don't say that everyone has to go to college. People can go to a trade school. People can just simply watch other people do things and learn from them. Mm-hmm. I believe that the best way to learn in life is not necessarily go into college or anything else. I believe the best way to learn is to find people who do what you want to do and then mirror those people and watch what their exercises are. What are the things they do? And, it's so much easier right now, I believe, to succeed because there are so many people that have been successful that take their time to do podcasts like this or take their time to pour back out there, that I don't care what the subject is, there's a solution that's out there. My son's facing a blindness disease, and had we just been willing to accept what a doctor said, we wouldn't have any plan forward. We actually went out, even with an illness, and went out to the web and started looking for solutions that were real, and then putting the time and the effort and the energy into figuring out how will they work, what will be next. That's what's necessary. I watched a podcast last night, a friend of mine named Budge Husky did, who's used to be the head of the company I currently work with nationally. Now he's got an office down in Florida. He was trying to step back, and what he did instead is created the biggest, best office in Florida. But I was watching a podcast of his last night and just listening to how he was sharing what they were doing and how they succeeded and how they became more of a luxury brand. He didn't have to do that. He had some extra time because he's not running a national thing. He's running a local thing, but he was pouring back out, and I listened to it, and it made it easier for me to listen because I respected the person I was listening to. The same way I was giving Tom Ferry props earlier. it's easier for me to listen to the things he's doing because I hear how responsible he is and how much he's giving back. So I just say to you, educating yourself, if you are not reading enough, reading stimulates your brain. Reading makes your brain stay alive and active. I had a mom, unfortunately, that passed away with Alzheimer's. As long as she had a purpose, even though she had the disease, as long as she had a driven purpose, and we kept purposes in front of her, her life was extended about 15 years living with Alzheimer's, still being cognitively aware way past when doctors told us it wasn't going to happen anymore because we kept things in front of her. And I say that, like when you say how important is the education, how important is it to plan all of these things. If you are not taking advantage of the downtime, when you don't have great success, you have more time than anyone else. You have more time to learn, to listen, to. But if you're listening to people that are negative ever, you can develop those energies as well. But I think you should listen to a variety of things and different mediums. Like I have people that say, "Oh yeah, I listen to the news every night to determine." Please don't do that. That's not a great method. But it's okay to listen to it as a checks and balances. But I say instead, the thing that you've identified that you want to learn, go find that. Now seek out all the ways and look at them and really dig in. And the ones that you feel fit you best, those are the ones to do. I do it myself every week.
So kind of wrapping up things here, Jim, a couple last things that I wanted to ask you about. How important is networking to you as a business owner, as a sales professional?
I believe it's the most essential thing there is. And I think intentionally networking with others, especially at the beginning of your career and later, is super important because early in your career, everybody you network with knows someone else. And if you're intentional about that you're going to benefit them back, networking has to be mutually beneficial. Both of us have to think that it's going to help both of our businesses, or it doesn't make any sense to network. And you know what? Once you do network with somebody, and let's say, your goal is that you help that other person get 2 more transactions this year in whatever their business is, and then they don't give it back to you. If you're worried about that, then you're worried about the wrong thing, because those first 2 you gave them might not give anything back. But if you keep pouring in, the pour is going to come back from the other side at some point. Networking with your own client database is the number one thing. One of the guys, or one of the couples that invest the most with me right now is my second or third sale when I got into business, Joe and Barbara Abbott. And we have continually done business together for 40 plus years. 2 of my best friends on the planet. They think of me as both of them tell me all the time how proud they are of me. And they're like parents to me in a way, even though they're not quite old enough to be my parents. Their opinion of me matters to me so much. I can't tell them. And then another guy that does a lot of stuff with me is a former neighbor in my neighborhood I lived in 20 years ago before I had children, or right when I was first starting to think about having kids, a guy named Keith Fuse, who we've stayed friends throughout all that time. We don't talk every day, but we have millions of dollars invested together. And he knows I'm going to treat his money like I treat my money. And it's interesting that happens in a career, but that's all about the networking. And it's constant and always. Like if I am networking with a lender, for example, that I have poured into their business, but I've never really received a lot out of them coming back. As long as they're doing a good job, I may still let them continue to do my business. But at some point, there is in any networking opportunity a point where there's a give back the same way. It will never be equal. Everybody wants everything to be fair and equal. My partner, Mike Jordan, says the fair's in November. There's not any other fair in life. And he's accurate when he says that. And everybody they didn't treat me fair. Based on whose opinion?
Right. Yeah. So it's one of the things that I see in my circle, because I like to network. I like trying.
And you're great at it.
Put people together and that sort of thing. And I do believe that's really helped me. I wish I would have learned those things earlier. And there really is an art form to networking that we won't deep dive into it. But it's baffling to me how people want to achieve more and have more success and have more business, but they don't get out and meet people. You know, you're in real estate, I'm in security, but we're both in the people business. We have to know people. People have to know, like, and trust us, as you would learn in B&I. So last thing I want to wrap up, because this is something that a lot of people are dealing with. And I heard one of the presidential nominees, people running, talking about inflation, and they didn't really say anything. You know, it's I'm going to actually do a side video on that. But thoughts about inflation. It's impacting. I don't think it's impacting everybody. We all feel it, but it impacts the lower and middle class the most. Some people are really struggling with inflation, and there can be multiple causes. But what would you say is the dominant cause of inflation in the United States?
Dominant cause is we're printing money without having recourse. We're printing money every time, and I'll give you an example of this. A nation somewhere else in the world needs something. We give before we think about, can we give? And we give at a level that is beyond what our capability is. Well, how do we achieve that? We just print more money, which devalues that dollar every time we do it, which is what makes inflation skyrocket. Truthfully, because doesn't matter how much money you've got. Like when I was in high school, somebody asked, "What's the most money you think you'll ever make in 1 year in your life?" I said $100,000, right? Like, because that was a real amount of money back then. Mm-hmm. Today in Wake Forest, North Carolina, the average income for a family of four is $94,000 average. So I was shooting at a goal that's not, it's barely average now, thinking that would be the most I could ever do in my life. No, it doesn't matter how much money you saved or where you prepared at 20, the number you need at 70 or 80 or 90 to survive is a much larger number than you pre-planned for. Inflation and how it's impacting us right now, it cripples an awful lot of people and businesses because they are using that as an excuse for why they're not doing X, Y, and Z. Let me tell you something. It doesn't matter. And inflation does have a direct impact on interest rates. It does. Mm-hmm. But guess what? If home values in Raleigh right now are doubling every 8 years, if your home is doubled in value every 8 years, why does it matter what percentage of interest you pay or whether there's inflation or anything else? Mm-hmm. It's still a thing you need to be planning towards, because you're not going to save that money on your own, and your house becomes the shell for the saving investment account for you. Or if you're investing, you need to invest in things that have scarcity. And what we realize right now in real estate, the hangover effect we're having today is from the banking crisis in 2008, where we said that we had an oversupply of housing. That's what we said. It wasn't true. Just people stopped acting for that 1 year. 1 year in time, people stopped acting. Well, everybody developing lots stopped producing lots. Everybody building houses stopped building houses. that 1 year pause, and it was actually about a year and a half, that 1 year and a half pause, they said at the time we had an 8-year supply of lots in the triangle. I can't fix everybody's, I can tell you in the triangle. We went through that in 2 years. If it was an 8-year supply, we went through it in 2 because no one was adding to it. We have never caught up since. There is a shortage of housing right now in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is why prices are going up. That scarcity of inventory is making prices go up. Even if there's a smaller pool of buyers, the price is still going up because there's not enough to meet the demand. Now, every place in the country doesn't have 72 people a day moving there, but in the triangle we do. We don't have 72 houses that can be produced every day because the regulations we've put in place, which I believe cause inflation, we make it more difficult to get building permits, to get development permits. I go buy a piece of raw land. It takes me 3 years to get that raw land to the ground, 3.5, truthfully, recorded before I can start selling lots there. How do I solve an immediate plan that takes 3.5 years to solve? That's why inflation exists more than anything else. But our government getting too large is another thing that does it. When you run any business, you have to have an overhead in mind that you're going to run it with. Okay, if you're in that business and you just keep hiring more and more and more and more people, and you go way past whatever your budget was, when you're doing it, it doesn't make your company perform better, or your country perform better, or your world perform better. What it does instead is puts too much pressure on that particular aspect of your company, and more people is not always better. What you find, I could go hire 10 people to do this one job. Well, when it's a job that one person can do, the other 9 watch while the one does. Government right now is growing at a pace that is unbelievable. If you were to look at the White House staff right now, for example, and go compare it to and I'm not talking about presidents or anything, I'm saying just go look at the White House staff, the amount of money that's being paid to them right now, and compare it to what was happening 4 years ago and 8 years ago. It is so much higher. It's unbelievable. And it's not just the gross sum of money that's gone up, because that would have gone up over time. It is, there are that many people more employed, and that doesn't make things better. If I have 10 people doing a job that 3 should be doing, all 10 are going to be less efficient. Right now, I believe inflation we're using, everybody's looking for the excuse of whatever. Inflation happens to be it. Lowering interest rates or raising them, in this case, our people telling us that, you know what, if we raise interest rates, it's going to curb inflation. No, it's not, because less and less people are going to be able to build the product, and the product is what makes inflation happen. I mean, houses are going up at an astronomical rate right now because there are fewer of them, not because there are too many being produced. There are too few being produced, which makes the number go up. And it's true of most industries.
So when I think about it, if we're talking about a house and inflation specifically, you've got the government printing money, devalues it, period. And here's the thing. If not, why are we paying taxes? Why can't they just keep printing? Of course it devalues it. The second thing is when you do things, when you raise the cost of gas and things like that, that gets factored into everything. And then you create a shortage of the product, whatever the product is, it's going to drive, the demand goes higher, so it's going to drive up the cost. So you've got 3 pressure points on one particular product. And so that's going to create dramatic inflation.
In just my business, and I can't speak to everybody else's, today, it's more easy to sell a $2 million home than it is a $200,000 home. How could that possibly be, you think? There are more people out there in the marketplace to buy the 2 million than there is the 200,000, because while we say we're helping the people that are at the bottom end of the run, we're not. Our government right now is injuring them,
Crushing
not
them.
helping them. And that's a real concern that I have. And I'm talking about our current government who says they're trying to help someone, is actually injuring them. Listen, one of the ways to curb inflation is to allow entrepreneurs to expand their businesses, to create more business, to actually produce goods in the United States, which we are not doing right now because people think you can do it cheaper in other areas. But part of that is the fact that the entrepreneurs that are taking the risk, that are employing people, we're trying to penalize them, right? Let's tax them more. Let's kill them more. If we do, they've already got their money. Guess what they're going to do, Brian? They're going to pull off the shelf and say, I guess it's time for me to retire. All the job creation I've been doing, let somebody else do it.
Just shut it down and move.
When the entrepreneurs stop doing that, there's not a new set of them waiting behind. Back in 2008, a bank here locally called me and a bunch of the other top agents in town in a room, and they said, what can we do to try to fix the crisis we've got? We've got too many houses. What do we do to fix that right now? Everybody in there was like, oh, let's lower interest rates. Let's lower them. And they were already so artificially low, and that's how they got lower. That was the least painful thing for them to suggest. The real truth is, and it's what I help the banks that I'm on bank boards with now do, is we sat down and formed a plan of, okay, if we have $1 million home for sale, if someone else has a $500,000 home, we will take that in trade. If they buy our $1 million home, we will buy their $500,000 home. And now we own a $5,000 home, and we're going to try to find a person that has a $250,000 to buy it. And now we're going to leverage down. And we did it until we got rid of all of their negative inventory. And from that, fixed the housing crisis really quickly, but created a housing crisis. The opposite, not too much, too little. Got them all out there. And at a time when people were afraid to go back out there and do it. If a dad who had his own building company for 50 years had to give up because a bank took all of their resources, they didn't want their child to go into that same industry. So not enough people got into trades. You know, a great skilled trim person who was making more money than anybody you can imagine, once he got injured, he didn't want his child to do that same thing. He wanted his child to do something else. So we have, the reason people from other countries have come to our country to do any kind of job is because we stopped wanting to do those kinds of jobs. Any job, doesn't matter what the job is, skilled or unskilled, it doesn't matter. We stopped wanting to do it, but it needs to be done. So when someone comes from another country here and does it for us, we should be thankful instead of saying, hey, we don't want those people doing that anymore. We should be sitting down and saying instead, you know what? If we aren't willing to do something ourselves, we should never complain that someone else takes that position. And I say that of all positions. Listen, the hardest thing to find today is a person who has a work ethic. Inflation is the excuse right now the government uses and the world uses for the fact that they aren't being successful right this moment. That's an excuse. Let's quit talking about it, and inflation will become less of a problem. Let's get back to work. Let's get back to not being too good to do certain jobs. If you run a business and you're too good to pick the paper up that's in the floor in that business, then you don't really run that business. That business runs you. And everybody that's there with you sees that you're not willing to do it. Why would they? I see my responsibility as the leader of my team is to be the rainmaker. If I'm not making it rain enough, that's my fault. I want everybody to manage the rain I create. And I hope they learn to create some on their own. But don't wait for somebody else to do something. Do it yourself.
Right. Last question for you. Somebody that says big business is causing inflation, what do you say to that?
That's a joke. Big business is creating all the jobs. It's where everybody's employed. Absolutely has nothing to do with it. The entrepreneur that started that business that's making the most money, I bet you go start talking to the people that work at their company, and they're going to tell you instead, gosh, I'm so thankful I have a job. I'm thankful that every year this entrepreneur is creating more opportunities in front of me. And by the way, he's mentoring down to me so that I learn to get in his position. And it's every skill set, it's everything. You know, I can look at the plumbing business as an example. Back in the plumbing business days, they had beginning neophyte plumbers that were there working with people who've been there for 40 years. That guy's been there 40 years, spends as much investment in getting this person ready to be at each stage of their development. And eventually they may own that company. But that's how business and the world works. I don't get to become a beginning employee and own the company in 10 minutes. How's that supposed to work? If you didn't have to work, if you give everything to everybody, like, you know, the people who lose their money most, I don't know if you ever looked at like the lottery, for example. Very few people who get the most money, more money than most of us will see in our lifetime at one time,
They're all broke.
have any in 3 years. Or people who inherit money. Like if you're wealthy and you believe the way to help your children is just give them all your money immediately, you're going to injure them so badly. I think, truthfully, you shouldn't give them any of that money. You raise them up to a certain level, but when they get out in the world, help them co-sign a loan for them to get their business started, whatever they're planning on doing, and then that's over. And you can't be the fail-safe anymore, because you can be there personally. You can be there to encourage. You can be there to tell them you can do anything anybody else can. But if they fall, every time they fall, you pick them up. You create a system where when their roof needs replacing, they're going to call you to replace it, not themselves. That's the society we're creating right now.
Yeah.
And we're trying to attack the people, the big business people that are creating all the opportunities for the rest of us. We want to overtax and overburden them. When you've already made it and you already got all the money, guess what they can do? Go off to an island, live by themselves, and do their own thing. Instead, they realize they have the responsibility to give back. If you've never achieved any level of success in your life other than being a cheerleader, you don't have that to give back. We're crippling the biggest businesses in the world because we publish a sheet that tells what all their salaries are, and now they're shamed by their own salary. Why are we doing that? We don't take the people that are in the middle income level of that company and post it and broadcast what every one of those people are making so that somebody is inherently upset about it. We had a frivolous, and one of the things I'm most proud of in my business, we've almost had no lawsuits in our business. We've had about 4 or 5 in my entire career, which for the number of things we've done is almost unbelievable.
Yeah,
and I've been actually to court 3 times. And, you know, each time we 100% were vindicated. But each time I realized nobody wins when that happens. You won but you lost because the cost of winning is always more
Money and
in
energy.
some way. Okay, but at the same time, when we're doing that, one of the most recent ones I was in, and I have most of my businesses are in LLCs and separated from my personal net worth. One of the first things they were suing an LLC of mine, but they wanted to know what my personal net worth was. I'm like, what does that have anything to do with this lawsuit?
Right.
But they couldn't wait because they believed if they could say that to a jury, it would prejudice them towards me because I'm already here and whatever. And I believe that they're right sometimes. Like if a homeowner sues a builder, homeowner's more likely to win in that lawsuit, despite the fact the other side has better representation, because the disenfranchised usually wins against the enfranchised. I mean, who doesn't pull for the underdog in life? You know, two sports teams are colliding, unless one of them's your favorite team. Are you pulling for the underdog or the guy you know is going to win?
Right.
I'm pulling for the underdog. And I think that's what everybody's doing.
Yeah. Well, I think that's instinctually where a lot of us are like that. You want to see the little guy overcome you want a good, everybody loves a good comeback story, right? Or a good overcoming. So, Jim, I really appreciate you spending all this time with us today. And,
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. And anytime you want to talk, I mean, I will happily host, and we're right down the street from each other, fortunately.
Thank you for caring enough about your clients and about just people in general. Like, one of the things, Brian, people don't know about you, and I do know it, is how often someone else who has a small business comes to you and needs help. And then the next thing I know, you're out organizing a party for them to start their own business, or you're putting them in a room with people that could help them. We do the same thing. And I don't know if you realize how often you do that. And I will tell you, when you post on something of mine, I may not pay attention to everybody's. Every time you post, I immediately, if it's your name, I pay attention to it. If you send me an email, I read that email before anybody else's. If I get a text from you, I read it first. If I don't read your text, you know I've got so much going on in my life,
yeah.
I can't move because it becomes a priority. And that's because you've led by a spirit of helping other people. That's the kind of that's how people tell me, what do you want your legacy to be, Jim? I want my legacy now to be, my young Jim didn't want this. Old Jim wants my legacy to be that people said he took the time to help me every time he could, and he actually cared about whether I succeeded or not. That's a great legacy.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for the compliment, Jim. Thanks for joining us, and thank you for joining us at another 5 Things podcast. We'll see you next time. Hello, this is Brian Smith, and thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more valuable content.